Good afternoon. Welcome to the next session of the Sustainable Long-Term Investment in Competitive European Industry Intergroup, entitled Enabling Impactful Investment via the Next EU Budget and Next Generation EU from Policy to Implementation. I am a member of the Secretariat. I'm going to give you a few preliminary remarks. As you can see, this webinar is live streamed on YouTube. You can ask a question to the panelists via the biggest platform. We advise you to use the Google Chrome browser. You can see the coordinates on the screen as well as in the description below. You will also find a copy of the speaker's biography in the description of the YouTube live stream below. I now hand over to Mr. Riquet. Mr. Riquet, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. As the co-chairs of the Intergroup, Madame Benafi and Madame Carvalho and myself would like to welcome all the partners of the Intergroup and the participants present with us today. Following our successful Intergroup launch event organized last October with Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, we have decided today to hold an event on a very concrete topic, which is how to maximize the impact of investments financed by European programs under the new MFF and new Next Generation EU, such as InvestEU, the Just Transition Fund, Horizon Europe, or Cohesion Funds. Know that most of the trialogue negotiations on this program have been concluded, except of the Connecting Europe facilities. Time has come to reflect on how to deliver impactful investments at a time when the challenges lying ahead of us require a critical mass of public and private investment, in particular for the recovery of the pandemic or the green and digital transitions. Today we have decided together at the same table all the stakeholders involved in the delivery of funding financed by European programs. They range from the European Commission, who manages these programs through a centralized or decentralized approach, financial institutions such as national promotional banks, or institutions or member states-owned funds, who complement the funding provided by the EU, as well as companies who are the beneficiaries of this program. The feedback gathered regarding the implementation of European programs often indicate various inefficiencies that are specific to each program. They can involve a lack of processes for sourcing the project. There are eligible to EU funding and transparent criteria for assessing the European added value of a project. A suboptimal technical support offered to project promoters and misuse of funding by the promoters who have been selected, a lack of synergies between EU program and sometimes still very poor digital access and outreach for companies and especially SMEs. On the hand, all these problems in the implementation hamper the success and the efficiency of European programs. This becomes problematic at a time when European companies have pressing issues to tackle and need European funding for innovating in breakthroughs, technologies, and remaining competitive. Our European strategic autonomy and resilience are at stake. That is why we cannot afford losing precious time and resources with inefficiency in the implementation of European funding programs. Companies across all sectors expect an optimized and smooth decision-making process for the access and the use of these programs. Understanding how to improve, that is precisely the goal of today's discussions. We hope that the debate will be fruitful and that it will shed light on concrete issues that the different stakeholders face when implementing European funding programs. We will try to keep this event as interactive as possible, as you will be able to ask questions to the speakers at the end of the panel. Now, I will give the floor to Mrs. Estelle Gosger, members of the Cabinet of Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni, who is in charge of coordinating the launch of the InvestEU program. So, Mr. Goega, you have the floor now.
Merci, Monsieur Riquet. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to this event. This intergroup is a very precious forum of discussion between policymakers and stakeholders on long-term investment and infrastructure projects. And it's a very important forum for discussion in between or during the implementation and between the negotiation of specific legislation or programs. And the current moment is very interesting because indeed we had the agreement on Next Generation EU and the MFF at the end of last year. We have a certain number of sectoral programs that were also agreed between co-legislators. But actually, all of this is, for those who are involved and know, only the tip of the iceberg, because there still remains a lot of work to do to ensure a timely and effective implementation. I wanted to take a step back and to explain again, or to shed light on how important this agreement on Next Generation EU is. This recovery package of 750 billion that the Council agreed in July, but my reference point is not necessarily this groundbreaking decision in July, but the agreement that was then reached with the European Parliament later in the year on the package of Next Generation EU and the MFF. But I wanted to underline how unique this is, because one has to realize that with the 750 billion, the EU will become, for the next couple of years, one of the biggest issuers of bonds, and on par with the largest EU issuers, or sovereigns, actually. So over the next couple of years, the EU will issue between 150 and 200 billion of bonds, and this is incredibly these are incredible volumes, and it also means that the Commission has to organize itself and build up organizational capacity, because this is a real challenge. And this issuance of bonds, you know that there was a commitment taken that 30% would be issued as green bonds, and currently what has already started is the issuance of social bonds for the purpose of the Shure program. This has a lot of success, and this actually will support the integration of capital markets and foster the international role of the euro, and it will also establish the EU financial markets as a kind of green finance hub. So this announcement of the agreement that was reached between co-legislators was very important, was a major signaling effect and good news for the financial markets. But in the end, the real success of this recovery plan will be measured against three important factors and elements. First, there is the speed of delivery. And here comes in my first slide of the presentation, which is linked to the approval process of the own resource decision, because it's the own resource decision that will enable the Commission to go to the financial markets and to issue bonds. So here you have the timeline, and you see that, well, it still spreads over a certain number of months. So our call and also the Portuguese presidency's call on the member states is really to try to ratify this own resource decision as quickly as possible, so as to allow that the funds will really reach the beneficiaries and have an impact on the ground. Then the second important element that we will be judged upon is the effectiveness, Dominique Riquet said, the efficiency of the money, of how it will be used. And this is actually what we are going to discuss today, and where colleagues from the Commission, but also actors from companies and from the private sector will come in to explain what the expectations are, how the money should be disbursed, for which type of measures. And this is very important because, of course, we want to disperse quickly to have a stimulus effect, but at the same time, we have to ensure that we really invest into the future and into the right projects that will serve the digital and the green transition. And here, the next slide shows actually the preparatory work. Here, it's the budget that was agreed for InvestEU. And the following slide shows the preparatory work, the timeline for one specific program, which is InvestEU. What happens next after the adoption of the legal base, which is due in March? Well, we will have investment guidelines that will be adopted. These complete the legal base and give further details as to what type of projects are eligible and what would be the risk sharing arrangements between the EU budget and implementing partners. We will have the call for expression of interest in March, because implementing partners such as national promotional banks or the EBRD, Council of Europe Bank, they need to answer a call for expression of interest. Then we negotiate with them a guarantee agreement. We expect to sign before the summer with the EIB and in the autumn with the other implementing partners. So you see that there is still a lot of preparatory work underway, and that the political agreement on the legal base is fundamental, but that after that, there still remains a lot of work to be done. The last slide shows another important program related to Next Generation EU, because as you know, the Recovery and Resilience Facility makes up about 90% of the 750 billion of Next Generation EU. And here again, we will be measured or the success of Next Generation EU will be measured according to the recovery and resilience plans of member states, whether they go into the right direction, whether they put the focus on the right type of investments and reforms. And so the Commission is already engaged with member states in informal discussions on draft plans. Sometimes there is a first version of the plan. So these are very intense discussions. And whether Next Generation EU and the EU issuing bonds could be a model for the future and not linked only to the extraordinary crisis times of today really depends on whether RRF will be a success or not. And then a last element of the criteria of the success and that we will be judged upon is, well, not only how we spend the money, but then the reimbursement of the 750 billion. And here it was especially the Parliament also that pushed a lot for new own resources and a roadmap for new own resources. And there was an agreement with member states, of course, to agree to a roadmap to potential new own resources related to the climate, but also to a digital levy, for instance. The Commission will come forward with proposals at the end of the first semester of this year. But then again, beyond the initial agreement, when it comes to concrete proposals and these becoming own resources, this will be very intense discussions with member states. All of these also have international dimensions, because elements such as a digital tax or a carbon border adjustment mechanism have an international dimension. So this is also something that will be delicate, but that is very important, and that is part of the elements we need or the criteria upon which we will be judged. And finally, I will close by identifying or by pointing to other elements of the debate, because today you are going to focus on EU budget programs and instruments and the next steps towards their implementation, how to make them efficient and effective, what implementing partners contribute, what the expectations of companies are. But beyond this, even though we have this huge recovery package of 1.8 trillion, what remains essential is member states' capacity to invest, and so the fiscal policies of member states. And here, measures were taken at the outset of the crisis, like the temporary state aid framework, and the general escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact. And as we go on, once our programs are on track, we will have to reflect on the future fiscal rules of the EU so as to allow that while ensuring sustainable public finances, and we will have to work on our debt level, but we still have to ensure that member states have the margins and the possibility to continue investment, to invest in infrastructure, in the transitions, and this will need to be discussed, and we will need to look at our rules in future against this background. Voilà, I will remain there during the session, so I can maybe come in after the panel during the question and answer session. And now I'm looking forward to the contribution of colleagues.
Thank you, Estelle, for this very valuable insight from the Commission, I think, and a very practical one, too. We are happy that you can stay with us until the end of the event. It could be useful for the question. And I will now pass the floor to our moderator for the panel, Gregory Claes. Gregory, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Riquet. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this 1 hour and 10-minute session on EU financial instrument from policy to implementation. My name is Gregory Claes. I'm a senior fellow at the Brussels-based economic think tank Bruegel, and I'll be moderating the discussion today. So basically, the idea of the panel is to discuss how revamped and new EU financial instrument will help boost investment in Europe in the next few years. As Mr. Riquet already mentioned in his introduction, Europe is currently facing two major challenges as regard to investment. The first one is that we have an immediate problem with a very significant fall in corporate investment since the start of the COVID crisis. Just to give you a number, at the end of the third quarter of 2020, investment was still 9% below its level 1 year before, so that's a very significant fall. And second, we have also to face a more structural challenge with the need to boost investment in order to raise productivity in Europe, because productivity growth has been very low, and also to develop a decarbonized economy. So EU financial instrument should help with those two issues. And as it was said, last year, 2020, was a critical year in terms of negotiation for the MFF and for particular instruments like InvestEU, the Just Transition Mechanism, and of course, as it was just mentioned, for the Recovery Plan and Next Generation EU. But in 2021, this year, this tool will have to start being implemented, and that's what we want to discuss today, how to go from abstract policies, from using them in practice. And as Mrs. Gogger just said, there is still a lot of work to do on that front to make them effective and efficient. So to discuss these issues, I'm delighted to welcome 5 great speakers that will be able to reflect on this topic from different perspectives. So let me introduce them quickly to you in the order of their intervention. First, we'll have Filippo Munisteri from the Commission, who is the team leader of the InvestEU implementation unit in DG ECFIN. So Mr. Munisteri has been part of the team coordinating the negotiation on the InvestEU program with an emphasis on social investment and the skills window. Then after, we will have Dr. Jan Claessen, who is the director of the Federal and European Affairs of the German National Promotional Bank, KfW. And in this function, Mr. Claessen is responsible for KfW's public affairs with the relevant German ministries, the Bundestag, and for relations with EU institutions. Then we'll have Herald Reuters, who is also from the Commission and is the director responsible for the Directorate in charge of investment, innovative and sustainable transport in DG Move. Then we'll have Philippe Citroën, who is the Director General of UNIF, the association that represents European train builders and rail equipment suppliers. And last but not least, we'll have Gerhard Humer, who is the Director for Economic and Fiscal Policies at SME United, the association representing SMEs across Europe from all sectors. So first, let me thank you very much for taking the time to participate in this event. Just before I give you the floor, let me quickly explain how we'll proceed. We'll start with some short introduction from our 5 speakers for 7 minutes each. And I'll ask you to be very punctual because we have a very limited time for this event. And then this will be followed by a discussion and a Q&A session with our online audience. So you can use the BCAS platform as it was said at the beginning of this meeting. So without much further ado, let me start with a question for Filippo. Filippo, thanks again for joining. So the question I asked you in advance is the following, and I hope you will reply to it. Filippo, could you just present the state of play of InvestEU now that the agreement has been reached between legislators? And could you in particular focus on the novelties of InvestEU with respect to the previous version? For instance, about the different windows, the direct access of NPBIs, etc., and its potential synergies with other EU investment programs. Filippo, if you're there, I'll pass you the floor for 7 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Gregory. I hope you can hear me well. And indeed, I will walk you through a little bit what happened with the InvestEU program. As Estelle said in her keynote speech before me, we got an agreement with the co-legislators just before Christmas on this very important file. And this was thanks, of course, to Parliament and Council, which were very smooth in processing the file. As you might remember, with the first proposal on InvestEU dates back from 2018. We had a general partial agreement already in 2019, but then, of course, in May 2020, we came back with a new proposal. And this proposal, of course, had some different elements as compared to the 2018 proposal, and was negotiated in a very quick time by the co-legislators and was closed on the 7th of December. I will walk you through some of the main elements so that we have, starting perhaps from the budget for the 4 windows of the InvestEU program, and then I will give you a short state of play building on what Estelle said in her intervention before me. So when it comes to InvestEU, we will have now a total budget of around 11.2 billion euros. Of those, 10.5 will be used for provisioning the guarantee. And this will allow us to have an InvestEU guarantee that amounts to around 26.2 billion euros with a provisioning rate that is maintained at 40%. This will be split into the 4 windows that already existed in the 2018 proposal. And the budget will be split more or less as follows, with the infrastructure window will be the most prominent one, with a budget in terms of InvestEU guarantee on 9.9 billion. R&D window will have 6.5 billion, 6.9 for the SME, which is the second largest window, and 2.8 for the social window. So this is a little bit the amounts as were negotiated by the co-legislators, which agreed on the split at the very end of the negotiation process. This is important to give you an order of magnitude of what we are talking about. What the legislators instead didn't touch compared to the first proposal was the split between the EIB group and the other national promotional banks and the IFIs that will be our implementing partner. This is a major novelty of the InvestEU program as compared to EFSI, for instance, the direct access to the guarantee. And this aspect was not touched, so the 75-25 split was kept by the co-legislators. When it comes to the point, perhaps the strategic investment. You might remember that one of the elements that was more predominant in our new proposal of May 2020 was the establishment of a strategic European investment window. This, in the light of the agreement on the MFF budget, of course, we had to reconsider a little bit what the existence of this window as a standalone window, but we managed to include all the elements that were in the strategic European window that were streamlined into the existing windows. This basically brought to the expansion of the annex that contains all the eligible areas, where some strategic investments were actually many of the strategic investments were incorporated. Another important point that was added during the negotiation was a link to the between InvestEU and the Recovery and Resilience Facility. So the co-legislator on this point agreed that a member state can, on a voluntary basis, use the InvestEU fund and the InvestEU Advisory Hub as a way to implement part of their recovery and resilience plans, in line, of course, with the RRF objectives, and in the meantime, respecting the milestones and the target in the RRF. This contribution would be channeled through what is called the member state compartment of InvestEU, and regulated in a similar way as we regulate the voluntary contribution from share management funds. Another important novelty, perhaps, that is worth touching upon is the Just Transition Scheme. The Just Transition Scheme will be the second pillar of the Just Transition mechanism. And this will be a dedicated scheme to generate additional investment for the benefit of the Just Transition territories, which have been identified by the member states in complementarity with the Just Transition Fund, basically. We have introduced this link in the regulation, and the investment guidelines will give more detail about how this the Just Transition Scheme will be implemented by the implementing partners. Then another important point, perhaps, was the addition of an element of capital support for SMEs. This was an important point raised by the Parliament in the legislation. As you know, we had submitted in May 2020 the so-called Solvency Support Instrument, and during the negotiation, element of capital support for SMEs that are in trouble as a result of the COVID crisis was included in the InvestEU among one of the objectives that we have in Article 3. Then there was another important point that also Estelle was touching upon, is the contribution of InvestEU to the green transition, and hence InvestEU was already born as a rather green program, and we still confirm the 30% of InvestEU financing to contribute to the climate target, and we added a reference also to the biodiversity ambitions of the Commission. We introduced a notion which is important for the implementing partners about the warehousing, so the opportunity that we give to implementing partners to start supporting companies already from the 1st of January 2021, warehouse these projects, and then put them under the InvestEU guarantee once we sign the guarantee agreements. And see, with this, perhaps I will go quickly to the roadmap for InvestEU implementation. We are now waiting for the plenary of the Parliament that should be in the first plenary of March, that will vote on the InvestEU agreement. And then there are a number of, after the publication in the official journal, we will publish the Commission decision on the investment guidelines, on the guidance that we are going to give to implementing partner for sustainability proofing and climate tracking, and we will launch the call for expression of interest for selecting the implementing and advisory partners that have the right to 25% of the guarantee. This, to give you an order of time, it was, as it was said by Estelle, we are talking about the spring, like most likely like end of March, April, we will issue this call. We will have two cut-off dates, one in May 2021, one in September. And for the EIB and the EIF guarantee agreement, we will probably be quicker because they don't have to undergo this call for expression of interest. And so we hope to finalize the negotiation of the guarantee agreement by probably June 2021. For the rest, for the other implementing partners, I think here we are talking about starting to finalize the first ones in probably August, September 2021. And then it depends. I mean, we give maximum freedom to the implementing partner to choose the cutoff date of the call that they are better prepared for, let's say. And then let's see, because we will allocate a substantial part of the guarantee now in 2021, and then we might have another call probably in 2023, 2024, like in line with the midterm review. And I'll stop that for the moment.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Filippo, for this short summary of where InvestEU is going. So let's move now to Dr. Jan Klessen. So Dr. Jan Klessen, I understand that KfW, as well as other NPBIs around Europe, have been quite busy in the last year. How did you react to the economic crisis? How did the EU support? How did the EU support NPBIs in their work? And what role could EU financial instrument play in the new MFF to further support the recovery and support NPBIs? And where do you see challenges in their implementation? And what role can NPBIs play in that framework?
Well, thank you, Gregory. And first of all, let me thank Filippo for his good intervention and to lay out the plan we are now going to follow in putting this plan to work. And Gregory, your question had about 4 to 5 layers, so I'd start to answer them step by step. As NPBIs are typically owned by nationals and governed by governments, they are the obvious crisis instrument to react, counter signal, and address some deficiencies. Currently in the pandemic, there is a market deficiency of money available, liquidity available. And what is very important is a close discussion with the relevant ministries. This allows us to setting up first instruments already in March 2020. So when the pandemic kicked in on March 23rd, we got live with our first programs and could have people put in their application. Over time, we have received more than 100,000 applications, and that includes already the extension, to which I come later, thanks to the state aid regime by the EU. And this is more than 45 billion, roughly, of money put to work for the help of the SMEs. The average amount we put out was around 300,000 euros. So we really put our money to work at the SMEs. That was the target area. And just to get an idea of the dimension of what we're talking here, each one of us have been very busy in saving the financial crisis and the aftermath of that. But the volumes and the at stake in the financial crisis were less than a third what we have now in the COVID-19 fight. So this is really a big change and a big relation to know. And you can really go further back in the history and go to the famous Marshall Plan. This Marshall Plan funds who helped to recover Europe is still also a third only of what we have now put to work for the COVID-19 pandemic. So we hope that this is the right answer brought by the NPBIs and KfW in Germany to find an answer to this really historic dimension of the crisis. And what has been very helpful has been that improving the loans terms for the SMEs to make it easy to apply, to simplify risk assessments for small loans, and that basically all of the most part of the risk, 90%, has been covered by the government. So the working capital investments initially started by 90% taken by the government, 10% by the on-lending banks, and in certain areas for the very small, very quick needed help, it was up to 100%. We also supported students because many of them having lost the employment. This is the idea of the EU, and all of us see that having a good education is important, and being clever and being smart and getting the right address, you need education. And to help students who have, many of them have lost employment, to continue their studies and to be able to fulfill their job. Next to it is the startup facility, and the startups who have lost basically all of their refinancing. We have come in with the Corona matching facility with regional promotional banks and together with the EIF, to which we're very thankful, to put 2 billion at work for rescuing startups together with direct investments on behalf of the government to support the vaccine development. Those are just some ideas of how KfW acted, and NPBIs in all other European countries have done more or less the same, with maybe a little bit different of magnitude, maybe a little bit of different details in 1 or 2 programs, but the overall idea was to be unbureaucratic support extended quickly. This is the importance of speed, which we would need to put in place in order to help the companies pretty quickly. The EU did support, and from us, most significantly is the temporary state aid regime. This was really the key to allow for development of the program, implementation, and also the flexibility to extend them as and when necessary. And this is the biggest thanks to the EU support to allow NPBIs to do that. That's safe from all the joint vaccine program to healthcare sector, to humanitarian aid, to including the joint purchase of vaccine from various companies, capital market recovery package. But again, this temporary framework agreement together with the ECB liquidity support, those were the most important parts. What did we learn from it? And which might be also helpful to the question what role of EU financial instruments in support of recovery can be helpful. I would like to put it down to one simple word, and that's KISS. KISS would stand for keep it short and simple. I think that's the most important part, what you would need to do in order to bring quickly the help to where it's necessary. And that also needs some political resilience. That's the second signal I would like to send, because not everything, not each and every small guidelines may be fulfilled by this speedy implementation. And some sort of maybe hitting the goal, not 100%, but maybe 95 or 90%. And yes, you can be criticized in the by hindsight at the end that you may have been smart at the beginning on this very little dot and comma there. But then you will have done the job 2 years after the pandemic kicked in. So you really need to be speedy, keep it short, keep it simple, and have good the main focus on the main regulations we're in, and accept that maybe some small critics may come afterwards. That's where we need political resilience. What do you gain from that? What is your advantage from that? By putting your instrument quick and easy to work, your trust in your words and the trust in your action is half of the success. Because then people think, yes, there is some help there if I need it, but I first try to do it by myself. But if I need it, there is something. So you need to act bold, decisive, deliver what you promised, deliver it quickly. Then there's trust in your words. At the end, in Germany, it worked out that maybe roughly 15% of the overall offered support was actually necessary to put to work only. So that is the results, the learnings we had. And the challenges for implementation, we are very positive that the InvestEU has a direct access for NPBIs, but it may not be easy to convince the product developers to use EU guarantee in light of additional bureaucratic burden. So legislators would need to understand that while NPBIs work through promotional programs, small tickets with great additionality, high standards of supporting them comes with additional obligations. So we need to limit those bureaucratic needs in order to bring people forward to make use of the well-structured and the well-aimed EU programs. And a very concrete example, the RFF reference to do no significant harm and the EU taxonomy is asking to provide technical guidance document. And this is a lot of work to be done easily by big companies, but not so easy by smaller companies. And therefore, I would like to stop here and hopefully the KISS, political resilience, and act swiftly, put trust in your work. Those are the most important things to go forward. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much for your explanation about what KfW has been doing and the lessons that you learn in this crisis. Let's now move directly to Herald Reuters. Herald, if you're there, could you present us with a panorama of how transport project will be funded in the new MFF through all the different EU investment programs like InvestEU, the Just Transition Mechanism, the Cohesion Fund, etc. And maybe provide us also some details in particular on how grants and loans can be combined with the CEF transport blending facility, for instance. Herald, if you're there.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Gregory. I hope you can hear me well. And thank you for the organization of this meeting. I particularly greet also Mr. Riquet for his, let's say, lead, not only here, but also in the negotiations of the CEF trilogues at this moment still ongoing. You asked me to sketch a horizon in 7 minutes, so I'll try to be short and to the point and not dwell too much in different areas. What I would like to leave the audience with is that the EU in its MFF and its next generation EU budget for the next 7 years has been, I think, trying this time around even more than any time before to make available budgets that are complementary to each other and that allow to address the Green Deal. It's the point that I would like to make most here in this panel, the complementarity of the different possibilities for funding and financing. First of all, it starts, of course, with research, with Horizon Europe, because many of the solutions that we will need to have for the Green Deal are coming from the research program Horizon Europe in combination with all it offers, whether it's the partnerships, the joint undertakings, or the missions, because there we have to craft the solutions for the future. And the Horizon Europe program, with its 3 pillars, also the accelerator that was mentioned in the chat, allows to do that. For instance, in the sector that I'm active in transport, we have no solutions at this moment in time, even if we are now meeting virtually, to completely carbon neutral fly across our continent or across the world. And so we foresee that by the end of the decade, the first prototypes should be there for electric or hydrogen fueled or sustainable aviation fueled flying would be possible. And that we can deploy that as of 35 to be in time for the 2050 minus 90% CO2. Horizon Europe is the starting base, and it provides grants at relatively high rates because of the complexity and the non-market readiness of what is needed. We come thereafter into deployment. And there should be no gap between the research and the deployment. So our newly crafted Horizon Europe is in its second pillar much closer in its technical readiness to the deployment. And in deployment, we have several programs that are working. On the transport side, but also energy and telecom, we have the Connecting Europe facility. It is a program that is centrally managed, which means that there is a very high focus on the EU added value, and thereby the climate earmarking is also very high. And we are working with Mr. Riquet to embed that even in the article of the text, and it is put at 60%, one of the highest of all the MFF and Next Generation EU. And for transport, in order to achieve the 60%, we will even be at 80%. And there are colleagues who are asking us, why not 100? I can easily explain, dear ladies and gentlemen, not 100, because we also have to put some money, for instance, in safety and security and those kind of aspects of transport, and thereby we cannot get to 100. But factually speaking, we are at almost at 100%. We put all the money in green and sustainable, in railways, inland waterways, interoperability capacity, and so forth. And alongside the Connecting Europe facility, which is especially focusing on cross-border and cross-border programs, we have, of course, the ESI funds and the RRF. And they are decentrally managed or indirectly managed, so by the member states. And the focus is different, but the focus is still what we should achieve. It cannot be that it will be used for what the member states like alone. I mean, it is within the framework that has been set. And so there is also climate tracking and DNSH, the do no significant harm proofing, that has to be respected and for which guidance is given by the Commission. And so there is complementarity between CEF, ESI funds and RRF. And then comes the next step, because once we are out of development, deployment with grants and subventions, there will be market readiness at some point. And then we can transfer to InvestEU and in the end to EIB and bank lending. Because we cannot, with the public hand, continue to co-fund or to grant money eternally. If I look in one of the sectors of transport, for instance, with ERTMS, the signaling system for rail, at some point it will be clear that it will transit to the market. And here it is very clear that this is an example which I chose because, of course, I also will hear Mr. Citroën after me, which shows that these different budgets should be seen together. Research is needed for the future generations of the rail and I would say the interoperability. Deployment is still needed for trackside, but slowly, bit by bit, we move to blended and to InvestEU in the different windows, in the sustainable infrastructure window, and then to the lending and to the market itself. And I think this is what I wanted to stress. You have asked me, Gregory, to make one particular point, and I still have 1 minute of my 7. The blending facility. Indeed, what we feel is that sometimes you can have a little, let's say, gap between the one and the other. And so we are blending sometimes in between, for instance, research and InvestEU with the specific window that was mentioned by my colleague before. But we also do that, for instance, between the CEF and transport and InvestEU, or within the CEF, in order to prepare for the getting to the InvestEU. And the alternative fuel facility is in fact bringing together there where needed a component of subvention with a market provided loan, either from our IPs like the EIB, CDC, KfW, or also from private banks, and thereby increasing the I would say the structuring of that project, because it is being due diligenced by the IPs or by the banks, and it is provisioned with a subvention which makes it more easy to get there. So it's something quite ingenious, but it is again to be seen in this full picture of the different instruments. So complementarity, I think, is something that is needed and will be allowing to be as targeted as the Commission wants by offering solutions for our goals. Thank you, and back to you, Gregory.
Thanks very much. It was great. You really stressed out how all the different programs complement each other, so it was really useful. So now let's move to Philippe Citroën. Philippe, if you're there, could you please give us a perspective of the rail supply industry, which benefit from targeted EU investment program like the CEF, InvestEU, the Cohesion Fund, etc., including maybe the Just Transition Fund, and which program are for you the most useful in your sector in particular? Which one do you think will work best? If you have already an idea about that, it would be great to develop that. Thanks. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Gregory. There are a lot of questions, and I would like first to thank Mr. Riquet for having invited me. I think the Riquet is playing a very important role in all those topics. Just a word about UNIFE. UNIFE, as it has been said, the European Train Builder and Rail Equipment Supplier. It's an association of 100 members. We represent 400,000 jobs in the world, and annual sales of 47 billion of euros. I think the first thing I would like to say is that the rail ecosystem has been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. You have to know that we are looking at a very uncertain future due to the financial losses sustained by our customers, the operators and the infrastructure managers. Recently, CR, our colleagues from the railway undertakings, have published a press release saying that as for passengers traffic, and there's a 24 billion loss, and the turnover of the railway operators in Europe has dropped by 42% in 2020 compared to 2019. So with the resurgence of lockdown and quarantine measures, the prospects for 2021 are quite worrying, but we have to avoid a potential market contraction which would have a devastating effect in the industry, including on the numerous SMEs that has been mentioned by Mr. Riquet. They play an essential role in our supply chain, and they deserve and they need a real financial support. Now, we can say that the good news is that this scenario can be avoided if the EU and member states decide to implement massive public investment plans for rail. So let's go directly, before saying a word about Horizon Europe. Of course, we are quite happy because we have the feeling that there will be another joint undertaking for the rail sector, which is called Europe's Rail, and we're happy to see that we will continue the work of all the rail stakeholders on research and innovation, because innovation is absolutely essential as we have to fight against a very important and impressive competitor. But on CEF, I don't want to say much, because we do consider that it's a fantastic tool, financial tool. More than 70% of the previous program from 2014 to 2020 went to European rail project. Harald Reuters a few minutes ago have mentioned all the success that we had in the deployment of ERTMS. And answering to the questions, I would like to say that it is worth mentioning the recent project whereby, for example, SNCF will deploy RTMS on international and national trains running in France. This is a project where Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, Spain, and the UK are participating together. It is supported with a EU grant contribution of 31 million euros, which covers almost a third of the 92 million total project. This is, I would say, a promising example of how financing may be used in the rail sector, but we still continue to hope that on the CEF2 program, a big part of the prioritization of the funding will be in the form of grants. Regarding cohesion policy, from what we know from the official data, there's been from 2014 to 2020, 70 billions of euros allocated to the transport sector, and there were 26 for the rail related investments. I think that the member states have been using these funds to develop and modernize the infrastructure, deploy RTMS, acquire energy efficient rolling stock. So we really hope that in the future with the member states we'll continue to invest in those very important projects, which are at the heart, I would say, of the Green Deal. And now, if I say something concerning the fact that you know that recently the Vice President Timmermans and Mrs. Valean has presented what they call the Smart and Sustainable Mobility Strategy, which is very challenging because they are planning to double the rail freight traffic and to triple the high-speed rail traffic by 2050. This will be crucial if we want really to achieve the Green Deal objective. Extremely important, and I will say it very quickly, is of course the recovery and resilience facility. And of course, we know that the member states have to deliver projects by 2026. So we need to make fast-track investments which provide for quick wins. We think about the deployment of the RTMS, but also we've been discussing with the Commission on what we call the EU-backed mechanism or scrapping scheme, which could encourage the replacement of all the rail vehicles by new, modern and more efficient ones. Don't forget that fleet replacement and fleet upgrades must be facilitated because it brings 30% of reduction of energy required compared to previous rolling stock. Now, in InvestEU, that would be I hope I'm still in the framework of the 7 minutes. On InvestEU, we would like to say that from what we saw on the result for the rail sector, it was a bit disappointing, but because there was only 6% out of the total 546 billion of investment which went to the rail sector. This can show that these channels are not the optimal path for rail investment because the industry of the rail sector is, of course, less attractive for private money due to the longer returns on investment. Yes, we don't want to be too negative, and I listen carefully to what has been said on InvestEU, but there are cases where it has been possible to financially structure the project with the mobilization of private sector financing. Then I would like to give an example. It's we can mention the FC guarantee of 470 million provided by the EIB for supporting the Spanish rail operator Renfe in its strategic investment plan for the acquisition of rail rolling stock. So if blending can be an interesting approach, it's, however, vital that this initiative run hand in hand with robust funding mechanisms such as CEF of the cohesion funding program. But we remain open to discuss with all the people interested on PPP models. Now, I just wanted to say that you know that the year 2021 has been declared the European Year of Rail. And we hope that it will be the opportunity to showcase the potential of rail and the huge benefits it brings to European citizens and the environment. And the last thing I would like really to insist about the SMEs. And we must not forget the important role that they have on the supply chains. And we really hope that there will be funding possibilities offered by the cohesion policy, but that it will be also possible to work with them on InvestEU and on the EIB. So thank you very much. I hope I've not been too long, but I wanted to give some examples of the different tools which are working and those who are where there are some question marks on our side, but we remain open to work on all these investments. On Just Transition Fund, I have understood that those are investments for carbon regions. So it's not very easy for us to be very proactive on this, but we always remain open to discuss on this. But I understood there is not a big interest on this specific fund. Sorry if I've been too long.
No, you've been perfect timing. Thanks very much for giving your frank views on each of the program and how they impact the rail industry in Europe. So last but not least, as I was saying, I'll now give the floor to Gerhard Hümer, Gerhard, could you give us a perspective of European SMEs who benefit from targeted EU investment programs? Again, the InvestEU, ERDF, the JTF, etc. And which program are for you the most useful for SMEs? Which one work best? And in particular, maybe I would like to know what you think about the what will be the impact of integrating the COSME into InvestEU, because COSME was in particular for SMEs. Please, I'll give you also 7 minutes. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for the possibility to bring an SME perspective into this discussion. SMEs are in general a very heterogeneous sector. However, what we see at the moment, of course, is that many SMEs are not only hit by a second wave of the corona crisis, but at the same time, we have to prepare for the twin transition. And this is the big challenge. And what I would like to do is now to give a short overview about what the European programs can do to help SMEs in this situation, recovery, plus the midterm challenges of the twin transition. The first phase of the crisis, SMEs had mainly a liquidity problem. OECD figures in our own survey say 50% of SMEs, in some countries even more, was suffering already in the first phase of the crisis on liquidity. And national governments and national support structures has really helped SMEs to survive this phase by providing deferrals of bank loans, by moratoria, by additional loan guarantees, etc., etc. The problem is that due to the fact that the crisis lasted longer than originally expected, now we have a lot of SMEs with a very high debt to equity ratio. So they are over in debt and will hardly be able on their own to restart, to recover, and especially not to invest in future transitions. Therefore, for us, the most important aspects of these new programs is to which amount these programs will be able to help SMEs out of the situation by providing equity, by providing quasi-equity instruments, or for very small companies or self-employed, even by providing grants, because it's the only way to keep them ongoing without risking of insolvency. The latest figures show that on average in Europe we have 10 to 12% of SMEs which are in risk of insolvency. This goes up to 30% in some sectors, because obviously in the personal services sector, restaurants, hotels, etc., SMEs are relatively overrepresented, and here we need support. So this is the situation, and when we look now what is available for SMEs, of course we have the InvestEU, we have the guarantee fund, the new guarantee fund from the European Investment Bank. We have the regional funds, including the Just Transition Facility, and of course the most important, or volume-wise the most important one, is the RRF. What we are doing now is trying, in cooperation with all the relevant stakeholders and intermediaries, to convince them to provide the right instruments for SMEs. As I said, going more long-term investment possibilities, going in the direction of more risk-taking, etc., etc. The most important as regards the volume are the Rescue and Restructuring Facility and the regional funds. In this area, there is the big volume. Both are indirect managed in reality. So that means we invest a lot of time at the moment to convince the national and regional structures to involve SMEs in the design of these operational programs, in the design of the national recovery plans, because only then you will create the necessary synergies. Here, we are also very grateful to the European Parliament and the European Commission that clearly said also in the RRF regulation, social partners and business organizations have to be involved in the preparation, and this also will be watched. The second point is we have to be clear that even with this big amount of money, if it's only used for public investments, we will neither succeed in the recovery nor in the twin transition. Both budgets have to be used also to crowd in private money by giving guarantees, by providing joint investment vehicles, etc., etc. And at the same time, and this is also written down in the regulation of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, it is not only about investment, there's also the need to implement the needed reforms laid down in the country-specific recommendation, etc., etc. So for us, the most known and the easiest instruments are the InvestEU facility, because in reality, the InvestEU facility is the successor of the EFSI, Strategic Investment Fund, and the integration of COSME into this fund should not become a problem. Rather, it should make things easier, because in the past, the implementing partners have to make different contracts if they use COSME money, if they used EFSI money, if they used Horizon 2020 money, etc. And this cannot be done in a more simple way. The challenge is that it is for the right instruments. And therefore, we very much appreciate the general approach from the European Commission, but also from the European Investment Fund, to say we are open to a wide variety of instruments. We will rather see what the market is demanding, what the national implementing partners need, what the SMEs on the ground need, because this has to be responsive to the real needs of SMEs. Of course, we are missing the solvency support instrument, and we are also not happy that the InvestEU program, including the SME window, is smaller than expected, is smaller than we have seen in the past. If you put all together the direct managed SME programs, because the member states have decided we give the money directly to the member states via the rescue and restructuring facility. And even again here, this is the reason why it is important that this money, which is missing in the central instruments, are now coming back via the national recovery and resilience programs and the operational programs at national level to compensate for the missing direct managed components. And especially in these countries where the national, let's say, institutional setup is not that much developed, like, for example, in Germany with the KfW, therefore, these membership compartments could be a good solution for those countries which may have difficulties to roll out such financial instruments at national level. This is what I wanted to say for the start of the discussion, and happy to go deeper if anyone is interested on one of the topics. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Gerhard. It was great and very good timing. So let me thank all of you already for your introductions. I would like to maybe give the opportunity to Estelle Gogger to react, and in particular on some things that Gerhard just said, and also something that was mentioned by Filippo, which is on this possibility for member states to use RRF money and put it into InvestEU. And I was wondering, maybe Estelle, you have already in mind how much of the RRF fund will be used in InvestEU? How much member state will use that possibility? You mentioned that the RRF plans, there are some draft already going around. So maybe you already know a bit, you already have some impression on if member states are going to use that opportunity.
Yes, thank you. Maybe a couple of reactions to the related to this topic, actually, because I fully agree with those speakers who said that we have this big pot of money now with the RRF, but that it would be a pity if it was entirely used for grant type support or investments. And we have worked so much under the previous mandates. I mean, when I look at the internal instruments, with FC, with sectoral financial instruments, now with InvestEU, to develop instruments that allow for crowding in of the private sector and to make the most of every single euro in the EU budget, that it would be a pity to now use the RRF only for grant type support. So yes, we encourage member states to also resort to financial instruments and guarantee type instruments. And when it comes to the possibility of implementing part of a member state's RRF money under InvestEU, actually this is capped. The legal base foresees that only up to 4% can be used for this purpose. But in the end, I mean, 4% of the overall RRF amount would be huge compared to the, unfortunately, indeed cut InvestEU guarantee. This was pushed during the negotiations a lot by representatives from countries like Italy and Portugal, who indeed want to make the most of this. In the end, we don't have a clear visibility for the time being about the potential use of this, because member states' plans, or the draft plans that we see, are not very granular for the moment. We see the big blocks on in which type of sectors they want to invest, what type of reforms they want to do, but it hasn't reached this level of granularity. And then I have to admit, I mean, as much as I love InvestEU, and I used to work with Filippo in the past, and I find it's a great program, but it comes with a certain number of strings attached. Jan has mentioned it as well. I think that this is due to the policy focus or steer that we want to give this instrument, and also ensure that it serves the digital, I mean, or the green transition, that we have the necessary reporting elements. But it could be that some member states consider that using their RRF envelope for financial instruments that they deploy themselves could be easier than channeling it via InvestEU, which I still think would be a pity, because there is an added value in InvestEU, and especially the European dimension, and we are available to provide a lot of support. But let's see, it's a bit early for the time being to give a clear-cut answer.
Thanks for your reaction. We are already running, our time is running very quickly, so let me take some questions from the audience. We have received many questions on different topics, so I'll try to group them maybe in different subgroup. For instance, we have received question about R&D investment, several questions about R&D investment. One of the question is, what kind of R&D will be supported in details? What are the criteria for R&D to be funded? Who can submit funding request, and to whom? So very precise question, and on the process. And there is also a more precise question on R&D. If one of you, maybe Filippo, or Estelle, could you maybe elaborate on the difference between the EIC accelerator and the R&D window in InvestEU, which are both supposed to finance R&D? If you could explain the difference between the two, and who and whom should use which instrument?
Yes, absolutely. May I?
Yes, of course, Filippo.
Okay, good. From starting from scratch, what is the R&D window about, and who should be applying for what? So in the R&D window, we have a number of different intervention areas now. The Annex 2 InvestEU regulation lists all the intervention areas. It's a window which is open to both the type of corporate financing as well as project financing, both direct operations and operations which might be done through financial intermediaries. The core, if you want, of the R&D window about research, innovation, digitization is about support to research programs which are at this stage rather close to the market. And perhaps here I can already draw a distinction with what is the EIC accelerator, for instance. There was one of the questions indeed was about the EIC accelerator, and the EIC accelerator is different for the type of step at which we are, the stage of the project and the riskiness associated to this project, to those projects. The EIC tends to be at the early startup phase, let's say, and when the company is not still able to work on its own legs and to raise sufficient capital, whilst InvestEU comes a little bit later and is closer to the market when the company is more developed already. And the EIC then has a grant plus equity component, which we don't necessarily have under InvestEU, even if, of course, we might do blending on at the financial product level. But of course, it's something a little bit different. Both of them have an advisory component. We have seen we have the advisory hub for InvestEU, and the EIC has the business accelerator services, which comprise training, mentoring. Is something a little bit more ad hoc, I would say, that the advisory hub on InvestEU, which is more linked to project development and capacity building of the financial intermediaries, for instance, or final recipients. It's something a little bit more. So the key point probably is about complementarity, because those InvestEU product basically can be used as a follow-up for a project which has been developed under the EIC accelerator that then is continued under InvestEU. And there was another question perhaps on research. Is that possible? I know there was another one for me on the social sector.
I was going to go to that second, because there are several questions also. So if you're finished, I don't know if anyone else want to react on the R&D question, but otherwise we can move to the other type of question about social investment. Does anyone want to react, to have anything to say about R&D or?
On R&D, I just want to say you have these tools, which is called the PPP, the institutional or contractual PPPs. On our side, as SSF, there will be a Europe Rail PPP. It's very interesting because it's co-financed by the industry, the operators, infrastructure managers, and the UNIFE members, and you can bring on board and co-financed, of course, by the EU institutions, but you can bring on board all the community and work together during 7 years. So it was a very good example of cooperation between all the rail sector, and that is a very good thing, I would say, which was created 6 years ago by the European Commission.
Thanks very much for intervention. So there are also questions, as I was saying, a lot of questions on social investment. And one of the questions here is directly posed to Filippo, and it's about what can InvestEU do to enable a financial instrument to effectively benefit to the social sector. And there is another question about, more general question, what about investment in education, vocational training, continuous training, R&D, but also healthcare, public health, etc. What are the main instruments to deal with that? There is a window in InvestEU, but are there other instruments to deal with social investment?
Yes, so well, about what can we do to enable to the financial intermediary to benefit the social sector. So first of all, we have a window which is dedicated to that, which we didn't have in the past, and this is probably one of the main elements of novelty of InvestEU as a program. We have this doesn't mean that we don't have an experience already into using financial instruments in the social sector. This is true both on the kind of more brick and mortar projects when it comes to financing of social infrastructure. Typically, EFSI has already financed a number of hospitals, educational projects, housing, and so forth. And it's also true when it comes to the fact that InvestEU will also put under its umbrella what is today the EASY program managed by the Employment that deals with financing for microfinancing and for social enterprises. And this will be also incorporated under the social investment skills window. And with this, I will also answer another question that was about the impact investing, which social impact investing indeed will be under the social investment and skills window as well. Now, impact investing is not necessarily social, but in the social part, we already have some pilots ongoing, like payment by result, social outcome contracts, and so forth with the EIF, and this we will continue. So I think yes. So there is a lot we can do for the social sector. On the top of InvestEU, perhaps what will be also interesting for social infrastructure financing is the so-called public sector loan facility, which will be the third pillar of the just transition mechanism, if you want. And this will be is a regulation that is being negotiated as we speak, and there will be another source of financing for investment in those in the area of social infrastructure.
Thanks for your answer. There is also in the chat one question that is quite general, but I find it quite interesting because I remember it was also a question that was very important in the previous crisis, during the financial crisis. Is how can we ensure that there will be a sufficient pipeline of projects ready to absorb the funds, the recovery funds, but also more generally all the funds from the next MFF? Because as Estelle mentioned, time is also of essence if we want to also those instruments to play a stimulus role. We will need a lot of projects in the pipeline. And are there projects in the pipeline? Maybe Philippe and Gerhard could also tell us if they think that there are enough projects in their respective sectors for SMEs, in the SME sector and in the rail sector, if there are a lot of projects in the pipeline that can use all the different instruments that have been put at the disposal of the economy by the EU.
If I can answer, I know that on the recovery plan that all the member states has to submit, I think, to the Commission and to Commissioner Gentiloni and the task force which has been created by the Secretary General. There are some member states who consider that 2026 is tomorrow, and they don't have any rail project to put on the document. I know one member state has said that to me, which is quite frightening, and I was a bit surprised because I know that when there are all the calls for the which are very well organized by INEA on CEP, there is an Herald, as he is the guy in charge of this specific tool. There is always an oversubscription of project, but I know that some member states are not going to present any rail project in their recovery plan because they are not ready, and that is a bit frightening. And I think that one of the most important thing which has to be done in the eastern and central part of Europe is to have a big actions in terms of capacity building, because if you don't have people to prepare the project, that nothing is going to happen. So there is an issue, and I think the question is extremely important, the one we have just
in the SME sector, the situation is a little bit different because we are not speaking about long project pipelines. But what we see is that every time when the European Commission makes a call or the European Investment Fund makes a call for SME financial instruments, or the European Commission makes a call for Horizon Europe, an SME call, they are heavily oversubscribed. So if there is any problem in any area to spend the money in time, SMEs are more than happy to step in and we have projects. And therefore, it's also very important that in the InvestEU regulation, there is the possibility in the midterm review to shift money between the windows if there are problems or more demand in some windows. And I can assure you SME window will be oversubscribed.
Very good points. Thanks. I'm afraid we are running out of time. I don't know if Herald or Jan, who didn't had the opportunity to react, have something to say before I give back the floor to Mr. Riquet.
Thank you, Gregory. I'm perfectly fine. It is a really interesting debate. I think indeed what also was underlined by Mr. Citroën, the readiness for submitting in the different windows that I also tried to depict depends, of course, also on the capacity to deliver within member states. And I can clearly subscribe to what Mr. Citroën was saying. It is important to keep it simple, as Jan was saying before, because otherwise, if there are ever-changing, let's say, requirements, you never get to a project pipeline which is robust enough to keep it going for a longer time. And this is, I'm sometimes worried about our own capacity in the Commission to always come up with new requirements. So I criticize myself. I think the simplicity of the instrument is really important. How simpler you can keep it, the better it is. And we are trying to do it in the Commission also by aligning between the systems, also, for instance, the e-grant that comes from Horizon, to have that for all the programs and to make it more simple to submit. But we should be really looking at that and help the member states by making enough money available, like we have been doing under FC and like is done in InvestEU, to help submitting projects. But perhaps to Jan?
I can only echo you, Harold. That's the conducive framework at EU level. I think that's important. That would allow the member states to act rapidly and effectively, putting their regional ideas into the equation and then put a program to work. And then stop the regulation and let the jobs get done. I think this is the right way to approach it.
Yeah, great conclusion from Jan. I'm sorry, I think we could continue this discussion for an hour, but unfortunately our time is running out. I'm sorry also for the people who asked questions, from the audience who asked questions, and we could not reply to all the questions, but we had many speakers. So I would like to thank very much all the speakers who participated to this panel. They did great. So let me give the floor back to member of the European Parliament, Dominique Riquet, for his closing remarks. Dominique, if you're there, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gregory. Yeah, I was very interested. I have just one reflection to do as a member of European Parliament. You know, it's not sufficient to vote the budget. You need for more than. We need for partner, we need for explanation, we need for need, we need for tools, and so on and so on. It's always very difficult to have the whole connection between all the partners, and money is not sufficient. There's something more. And the time was short. We can continue. We should continue, but it's quite impossible. I want to address a special thank to our speaker, because they were very interesting, they were disputable, and it was very interesting. To our moderator, Gregory, thank you for the job. It was well done. A special thank also to Mathieu, which was the organizer of the virtual contact today. I think it remains a lot of work for our intergroup, and is the first meeting of the year, but it's not the last one. And I hope that we can recover all together for the next rendezvous about that. But we have a lot of topic on the tunnel's desk. And I thank everybody for patience, for participation, for attention. And I hope to see you again our next meeting. Thank you a lot, and come back again with us.